too much crypto. Too much crypto is one thing when it actually achieves the stated objectives. I mean, you're performing too much computation, but at least you're getting security in return. But there's another kind of too much crypto, which is crypto that does not achieve the stated objectives. And I was wondering, what are your criteria or your litmus test for identifying snake oil or impostor crypto?
I thought your question had to do with Nadim's game you have in your hand, because it's quite cryptic as well. So your question is about the red flags for bad crypto. Well, you know, it's the dog test. I mean, but typical red flags. You know, I think I once created the crackpot list of crypto, and well, that's typically who did it. If it's random dudes with no track record of doing anything, if they claim to use AI or or chaos theory or wavelet, if they claim that it's unbreakable and that it's as secure as a one-time pad, at least if it's military grade, if it's a proprietary super secret, you know, I don't know if you know Time AI, but that's a good example. If there's some mathematical nonsense, like we use quaternions, irrational numbers, that we combine with third-degree polynomials on a quantum space. Yeah. So
Another important thing is if it needs a quantum computer to work, it's probably not good. So like quantum key distribution, everything in that sort of realm of stuff is usually kind of snake oil.
Well, quantum. No, I was about to say something that. Many quantum computing companies are snake oil. I mean, there's one company I will not name that is merging quantum computing and AI.
Do they have a blockchain?
That product is a library of post-quantum crypto. But one of the co-founders is a big name. I mean, you probably guessed, but no, maybe not. Ask me.
Maybe I should have mentioned this, but we're going to just be waiting until people come here and ask questions. So, come on, next one.
I have one question for you, Awa, but I will keep it for the end.
Oh, okay.
There's a certain class of problems. Thank you. There's a certain class of problems that I've been thinking about recently. So there was a bunch of people that came together and they wanted to do secure messaging for groups. And so they created MLS. And the idea was that secure messaging would scale to thousands, groups with thousands of people, right? And so when you have thousands of people in a group chat, the probability of someone screenshotting the group chat and leaking the stuff in the group chat is exponentially, it just gets higher and higher. And so you've built a system, and that's something that's very difficult to engineer and very difficult to implement, and there's all this like sort of cryptography and thinking to get it working. But ultimately, you're constrained within a sort of operational framework where confidentiality in the secure messaging sense is meaningless. It doesn't mean anything because it's confidential to 1,000 people with smartphones. So my question to you is, what can be done in order to identify situations where all the fancy crypto that we have does obtain security guarantees, not just in paper, but also in practice, but not outside of the protocol. So the protocol itself does get confidentiality authentication, but you're using it in a way where the real world system, it doesn't matter because of the people and the way that the system is deployed.
That's a very good question, Nadim. I'm sure Lucas has a...
Okay, so the way I think a good way to frame it is that what cryptography can do is it can remove trusted third parties from systems. So if you take any cryptographic protocol or system, it should function as if you had a trusted third party who you trusted absolutely to do the stuff. So with messaging, it's as if you had a trusted courier to carry messages back and forth between people. And so even in the abstract, if you analyze the system, if you had, for example, here, there's a camera recording us, it's not great, but if there were no cameras and stuff, we'd imagine that nobody outside this building would be able to hear what we're saying. But even just analyzing this, even if we were to sort of do this over a Zoom chat, which would be end-to-end encrypted, which would be sort of the analogy of having a room where everybody's there together and sort of the walls are sealed, you would still be able to sort of know that everybody in the room can hear you. And so I think taking this abstract high-level view of cryptography and specifying exactly what guarantees the protocol provides can help provide clarity about situations like this, because you know what expectations you have. So, yeah. Go ahead.
The question, cryptographer's job is to cryptograph, it's not to secure things. Yeah. It's not to secure systems. And it's a fallacy to think that, well, it's a fallacy to think that technology can solve human problems, and it's a fallacy to think that crypto can solve all security problems. And I had a question, because before when Philipp presented I have a question to you about it. You presented the scalability of TS of threshold signing, threshold encryption. I was like 64, 90, 8,000. But in practice, I've seen threshold signing deployed with at most 10-ish parties. So are there use cases where we need scalability to that many?
I mean, that's a very good question, and I think this is also like what we are seeing in general in the cryptocurrency space. That, like, you know, in like when Bitcoin started and then Ethereum and so on, like people were saying, oh, these are great systems because like anyone can participate and they are truly decentralized and so forth, right? But now what we're seeing is like this move towards like committee-based systems, right? Like many of these more advanced, for example, consensus algorithms, they use smaller committees like of like, let's say 100 participants or 200 participants, right? And it turns out it's fine, right? Like we don't need to, like in many cases, we don't need to have thousands, hundreds of thousands of consensus participants. And I think this the same here in like for threshold crypto systems, right? It's probably fine if you, in many cases, if you have like an MPC system or a signature system.
I had Nadim's question in mind, and I see if you have too many systems to secure, then in terms of governance responsibility,
exactly,
shit will happen.
Yeah, exactly. That's also what we're seeing, right? With, for example, now with all of these proof of stake systems, you have this like every new chain has their own validator set. Like you're distributing, like you're splitting up the security of your chains across all of these different validator sets. Instead of having something, I think Cosmos is trying to do that now, right? Where they can leverage the security of the Cosmos hub on the chains that are connected through IBC, right? Which is, I think, very nice. Right, because we've seen a lot of cases where like all of these bridges between chains that are secured by validators, they were just not secure enough because like the
single point of failure.
You had single points of failures in there, yes.
Another fun thing with like these MPC systems is you have these like fancy systems where they say, oh, we have 1,000 people coordinating to do a threshold signature. And then you ask them, well, how do you approve signing a message? Oh, well, there's one computer that decides that, and then ask the cluster to sign. So like often, if you want to like make a threshold scheme secure, like all the validation needs to go all the way through the stack. It's sort of the same thing with like HSMs, where like the HSM has to validate the logic.
And as someone once told me, crypto is just a device to turn any problem into a key management problem.
Yes.
So the more keys you have, be it in MLS, in TSS, and I always tell clients that don't worry about hacker with hoodies hacking into your system, chaining 10 days. Yeah. Worry about your backups not working when you need them.
Yeah, exactly.
For example, there is a good concept in anthropology called the anti-politics machine, which is this idea of trying to solve political problems with technical solutions. And I think we have to do the opposite. We have to think also more politically. So for example, in circles, you need these 3 people to trust you to enter the network, right? And so many people who come from like, high mathematics, they tell me like, oh, but it's not completely secure, you haven't really solved the civil attack problem and so on. But actually what happens in practice is that people just start to like, very concretely, like, oh, I need to trust you, okay, no problem. And there is like a lot of social structures that emerge. And also, you build assemblies and so on to try to complement the technology, right? So it co-develops, I think.
I think just one corollary of this particular instance of too much crypto is that crypto not scaling is not always an excuse not to use it. Sometimes you see like protocol designers who go after, oh, like we have the fastest blockchain in the world and it does like 150,000 transactions a second. And then like 2 people use the blockchain and they use it to transfer the token back and forth. Like, and that's their excuse for not using cryptography, is that the cryptography would, cut that number down to like 10,000 transactions per second. But did you need 150,000? No. So.
So I'm going to ask a troll question. So obviously we could cut down on a lot of crypto with trusted hardware. So why not?
Yeah, the solution to every problem is use an HSM or use the trusted third party. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess roles are somewhat differently distributed on stage here, considering trusted hardware, right? But like, in which cases do you see actual reliable applications? Like, I know there's some strong feelings about SGX and so on, but like where do you see this going? Do you think like we'll get to a place where like general computation, it will be helpful, or do you like, obviously HSMs are helpful, but as we discussed before, if they're standing alone, they're not super helpful. So where do you see those going overall?
Make it quite short, but yeah, regarding SGX, if you're interested, there's a very nice website, sgx.fail, with objectively all the issues with SGX. I think hardware, there's no silver bullet. I use HSMs, and I develop embedded software in the HSMs, and it's nowhere near a perfect system. It's a way to have security controls that you would not have without the hardware. It's a good tool in some cases, it's a bad tool in other cases. In the context of crypto custody, people often ask, oh, what's the best, HSM or MPC? Like, guys, it's 2 different families of solutions for different types of problems, and each with their own trade-offs. The single problem with HSMs and hardware in general is that it tends to be black boxes. So you don't necessarily have visibility on what's running inside, and you don't necessarily have a good understanding of its security limitations. So what I tell people is that whatever you use, make sure you know what you're doing, you know what the security means, and if it's certified, know what the certification, what is the scope of the certification? Because you might have FEEPs or common criteria or whatnot, but there's always a scope boundary of.
I think trusted hardware is interesting because it illustrates what I think is a stark divide between, I'd say, security people and cryptography. So in cryptography, you make strong assumptions, but then you give strong guarantees based on those. So you assume that like encryption is secure, and then you build messaging based off of that. And you have very strong guarantees assuming your encryption works, which sort of boils down to like block ciphers and stuff. In security, you usually make weak guarantees based on weak assumptions. So you sort of, that's why you develop techniques like defense in depth and other things like that, where you sort of assume that even if you're trusting something, you don't trust it completely, so you add extra layers and whatnot. And so the issue with trusted hardware is that there's this epistemic uncertainty about it, and that if you take the claims at face value and you take them cryptographically, they provide basically anything you want. And so then if you rely on them cryptographically, you're making a very strong assumption, and you get a lot of strong sort of guarantees out of that, but it's sort of a house of cards, because really it's the assumptions you have to make are much weaker about how much you can trust the hardware.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree to that. I think in the end it really comes down to, do some proper risk modeling and see, what are you up against, and then choose your tools accordingly. And I mean, trusted hardware can be a building block, right? But you should be really aware and think hard about where you want to use it and what can go wrong if that building block fails.
Yeah, I mean, I think one challenge with using trusted hardware as a building block is that the risk model is complicated and it doesn't socially translate accurately out to the actual users of the system. So usually we're using cryptography to try and provide some kind of protection, like protection for privacy and messaging or protection for privacy and transactions. And people who use these systems end up relying on that for often for their physical safety. They're, organizing a protest under a oppressive regime, and if their messages are decrypted by somebody, they could be thrown in jail. And they don't, not everyone who uses these protocols is going to be a cryptographer. And it's difficult, even while we want to build messaging protocols that can also be used by people who don't understand all of the cryptography, we want the sense of risk they have to be the same as ours. So they may not know why things would break, but they should have the same, when you talk to a cryptographer and you ask them about SGX, they're like, it's complicated, and these attacks, and yeah, and when you ask them about a hash function, they're like, yes, don't use so many rounds, there's a clear consensus, and that percolates out pretty accurately so that users are actually protected in many cases. But with XGXs, it just doesn't. If you look at, blockchain is more guilty than most of misleading marketing, but even in other systems, the users of these systems just clearly don't have a clear picture of the risks they're actually taking. And I think in that sense, it's very challenging.
To conclude on SGX, so it's easy to say, aha, SGX is broken. But to be fair, it was engineering-wise not bad at all, because they were trying to have full trusted execution, including remote attestation, on a chip with shared hardware, with the computation that was not in a secure space. And with the shared memory, so they had memory encryption, remote attestation, and the only other case where I know it being done on a consumer device is on some Android, with the Android toolchain.
Yeah, actually, that would have been my quick follow-up question. Do you think if the design would have been, let's say, a little less ambitious, it would have been more successful?
You mean SGX?
Yep.
I think they did close to the best they could do, and also, to be fair, if you look, on day one, I looked at SGX in 2013. I did a talk at Black Hat about it. And on day one, they said, security limitations, we don't claim security against side channels, power glitches, timing attacks. They just underestimated the scope of potential side channels like Spectre stuff.
Okay, then, sorry, just one more super quick question. You mentioned with hashes, we might do less rounds, but there's also these protocols like Bitcoin address generation, for example, where we apply 2 consecutive hash functions. Do you ever see a need for that, or is this also a case of too much crypto?
I think historically, the reason for the double SHA-256 was to avoid the length extension attack. But in itself, it's not bad, but yeah, there's probably too many rounds to SHA-256, but that's another question.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you for the talks. I have so many questions, probably too much questions, but let me start with one. So if I want to design applications using zero-knowledge proof systems, and I'm not in the field, and I start reading some papers around, I'm horribly confused. I don't even know where to start. There is ZK snarks, there is Starks, there's bulletproofs, and then there's Splunk, Halo, Splunk, Uberplonk, whatever. So my question is, how far away do you think are we from standardization process for industry, something like an AES for zero-knowledge systems? Is it too early because the field is still moving too fast, or are we getting close to it? Okay, next question.
One shot regarding the ease of writing ZK programs. There's a lot of work in the development of domain-specific languages. So there is Cairo, Lurk, Noir, Leo, and others.
Vampire.
Right, yeah. So that you can write, you don't have to write a circuit yourself, but you write just a program in some high-level language, and under the hood it creates the circuit and all you need.
Yeah, and there are endeavors still within the mostly within the academic community to try to standardize some of these things and develop common language to talk about these things. There's these sequence of ZK proof workshops that exactly try to do that. Yeah, I mean, there hasn't been this is active work, right? So I think it hasn't dispersed too widely yet, but these things are definitely ongoing. But yeah, as we've seen, I mean, there are still too many new systems being developed and researched and engineered. So from that perspective, it may be a little bit early still.
I mean, one approach that I think is compelling from the kind of application or even DSL writing perspective is to ensure that all of your programs and everything above a certain layer of abstraction depend only on abstract properties of cryptographic schemes, so that they depend on that a hash function is collision resistant or soundless or completeness or privacy, zero knowledge, but that they don't depend on the specific thing. This seems easy, but in practice it just tends not to happen. In a lot of enterprise software, people end up depending on specific hash functions. They code constants into their stuff all over the place, and you end up, for this reason, in part at least, with standards that are very hard to change. It's hard to reduce the number of rounds in web protocols because you would just break everything immediately, right? You have to coordinate a change across all of these places at once. But some, at least, better compiler infrastructure can help reduce that cost.
So one situation where we'd like to have more standard primitives is when it comes to hardware acceleration, people doing FPGAs or ASICs to speed up whatever ZK proofs are doing. So.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, the answer is we are not yet there, but it's better this way. Is that correct?
We have less need for standardization than other systems in the sense that interoperability across ecosystems is not yet.
Is not yet a problem. Okay, understood. Another quick question. So when we talk about secret sharing, let's talk about secret sharing. There is this hierarchical systems, like hierarchical secret sharings, where you have a level of authority attached to a share, and you need a certain authorization structure in order to perform a signature and so on. I have seen solutions adopting hierarchical secret sharings, but they don't seem to be extremely popular in governance system, for example. Is there a reason why people are not particularly interested in hierarchical secret sharing?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I only have a partial answer to that. I mean, with many of these things, I think they are still very, many of these things are still very academic, right? And I think it hasn't, the idea of this existing hasn't spread very widely yet, so that people have been thinking about what can we actually do with that in a useful manner, right? So I couldn't come up with really an application on the spot how you could usefully use that. Maybe one of you.
I think it's also the tooling, because I take a related example. If you get basic secret sharing, everybody will agree that it's better to have verifiable secret sharing, VSS. But in practice, I've almost never seen it used when you just need to share secret, because you have the utility SSSS, basic secret sharing, and you can just add a hash if you want verifiability.
Yeah, and to add to that, I mean, we are at this point, we are only now seeing that people are using the basic threshold crypto schemes, right? If you would go I don't know, 5 to 10 years back and tell people about threshold signing in industry, they were yeah, okay, that exists, but right, nobody was using it. And now slowly, probably also driven through the cryptocurrency developments, the idea that this exists and it's useful is slowly seeping into the heads of more people outside of academia, right? And I guess I would expect that this is very similar also for more advanced things like hierarchical secret sharing.
It's also perhaps unnecessary in the sense that if you think about what you're trying to achieve with these hierarchical systems, is you're trying to add some kind of application level approval system for when to sign stuff. And this kind of thing you can actually structure sort of orthogonally to like how the secrets are shared. So if you think about the threshold signing system, it's like, well, I validate some rules about whether or not I'm going to approve a signature, and then I sign it. And those rules, it's much easier to design a system where like the validation of those rules has like arbitrary hierarchies and like, you know, functions and policies and all these things. And then you just sort of distribute trust as much as you can sort of afford on your sort of cluster of threshold signing machines.
I mean, okay, this is, I think it's two orthogonal things, right? Like with a hierarchical secret sharing, you can implement these guarantees cryptographically rather than, let's say, governance at a governance level. But okay, I mean, I guess it's also a matter of, adoption and lack of interest for application. Okay, a very last question. So when we talk about zero knowledge proof systems, like except Starks, but all the rest are typically not quantum resistant. So my question for you is, how much interest do you see in the area or in your particular applications for quantum resistant solutions, like, I don't know, lattice-based zero-knowledge proof systems? If there is not a lot of interest, why do you think it's not interesting? And why are you wrong?
To give you my level of interest, yesterday a friend tells me, "Hey JP, what do you think of the PQ standardization workshop?" I was like, "What? What is it?" "Yeah, it's happening today." So I didn't even didn't know there was a NIST PQ workshop yesterday.
0.
Try to be positive a bit.
I mean, I guess from the application, sort of architecture perspective, I think I would separate out into like crypto that needs to be secure now and crypto that needs to be secure forever. So if you are, if you encrypt things and like store them somewhere and like they could be decrypted by a quantum computer, that's bad because like they're going to be decrypted eventually. But if you're just relying on,
signatures,
right,
and just re-sign,
right,
you're good.
then you just need to swap out your, implementation of
If
your.
you have private transaction, private operations, then arguably.
Okay, thank you. I will troll about quantum
Another
computing
question?
another time.
Just one point on that. I think if you look at most systems, you don't necessarily lose zero knowledge even if you had a quantum computer attacking the system. What you're immediately going to use is like you can forge proofs, but I think usually there's just so little information, especially in the succinct proofs.
Won't leak too much. Yeah, that's right.
Hello. In the light of the recent events like FTX collapsing, etc., one idea is gaining a lot of popularity, and this is proof of reserves and proof of liabilities for an exchange, for example. Okay. So my question is, which zero knowledge proof system or domain-specific language would be like the most tractable or the most suited to use to build up, such a system, in your opinion?
Malware proofs.
Which one?
Malware proofs.
Mike, we use quite boring signatures and as proof of reserve or proof of solvency. But I think the case you refer to, I don't think I have a clear understanding of the problem itself in terms of, okay, I want to prove control of certain assets, and I want to prove that I don't have liabilities. So at some point you have to prove a negative, and I don't know how to model this.
Yeah, so the general idea is that proof of reserve by itself is not sufficient, because you also need to prove that your reserves at least match their liabilities. And the one reason where zero knowledge proofs come into play is that if we build a Merkle tree on something, this still exposes quite a bit of data. So zero knowledge proof techniques would be potentially more privacy preserving.
Yeah, I guess if you really want zero knowledge proof, or regardless of whether it's zero knowledge, proof of reserves of assets and that they match liabilities, you can start to think about like a composite protocol structure that would accomplish this. When people like deposit, they get a signature that proves that they've deposited. You have like, that needs to be stored on a censorship-resistant ledger somewhere, so the exchange can't pretend they didn't do it. You know, someone can retrieve all of this later, but the structure that you end up designing looks like a decentralized finance protocol, and it's like unclear what the point of the operator is anymore, except maybe to order things, and they're like a sequencer. So, you know, it's good that things are converging in that direction, but it's not really a new direction. It's like the existing direction, and we've already made a lot of progress on full stack, or at least more of the stack, being, you know, decentralized and operator control and providing individual privacy, including to the operator. So I don't, you know, I'm not sure like this particular vector of, I realize this wasn't your question, sorry, but this particular vector of exploration is going to last a long time, other than like the current crypto exchanges trying to provide something that looks like proof of reserves, which they can't because they didn't track their liabilities. If it encourages people to account better, I mean, FTX's accounting is like terrifying, and clearly no one ever audited it. There's like an $8 billion that got lost, and most of their assets are measured in their own tokens, which have zero liquidity. It's like, yeah.
They didn't pass the audit.
Good one.
Okay, so the advice is build a decentralized system as opposed to trying to building proof of reserves and liability systems.
Anyway, don't operate a business like FTX. In the first
Yeah, I
place.
mean, what did FTX like solve a real problem, or did they just solve a problem of like be good at marketing? You know, so
Good question. Thank you so much.
And my last question, 2 hours. So first, congratulations for having run everything on time. That's like a Swiss clock. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, question is, I mean, that was a great event. When's the next? When's the next?
When's the next
The next too much crypto. Too much crypto.
Too much crypto. Yeah. Maybe next year.
Too much crypto.
Yes, socializing food and drinks. So the only thing left is that there's going to be fireplaces outside too. And they are marshmallows and sticks, so you can grill them there. There is also dinner, warm food, beers, and wine and everything. And I kind of just want to say, like, thank you very much. This is the very first time I do Too Much Crypto. I had no idea how it would turn out. It was an amazing set of attendance, speakers, and a big shout out to the team. It was not me who did the heavy lifting. It was actually Philipp, Chris over there, and Rovano who put this all together. And yeah, I hope to see you next year.